Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today on Boss Economics World, we are diving into a pivotal issue that's not just straining diplomatic bridges but also signaling the underlying fragility of global economic structures. In true Xiao Cui style, I'll dissect this issue with a mix of sharp satire, hard-hitting facts, and data-backed analysis to spotlight the cracks in the system and hold governments accountable for their economic management, or, more accurately, their mismanagement. So buckle up as we break this incident down layer by layer, from the trial of Hong Kong's democratic leaders to its broader economic implications. If you've been following the news, this week's highlight is the controversy surrounding Hong Kong's escalating repression under China's national security law. Former media mogul Jimmy Lai, alongside other pro-democracy leaders, is facing severe legal repercussions, potentially life imprisonment, for their advocacy and activism. Meanwhile, European lawmakers have called for fresh sanctions on Hong Kong authorities and Chinese officials, demanding the immediate and unconditional release of imprisoned activists. For ordinary viewers, this might appear as an isolated political incident. But as an economist, I want to sharpen your focus. This isn't just about human rights or legal oppression. Look closely, and you'll see how such political events expose glaring economic vulnerabilities that could ripple far beyond Hong Kong's borders. Yes, the trial of Jimmy Lai has turned into a symbolic chess match of ideological and economic power between China and the West, and one with major implications for you, whether you realize it or not. Why does the fate of one city actually matter? Stick around as we connect the dots, from political repression in Hong Kong to its ties with global commerce, sanctions regimes, and the delicate balancing act of economies worldwide. These repercussions reveal much more than meets the eye. When the European lawmakers proposed fresh sanctions, it followed a familiar script. Sanctions are, after all, the West's preferred weapon when diplomacy fails, first deployed with gusto against Russia, Iran, and North Korea, and increasingly now aimed at China under the guise of upholding democratic values. But here's the kicker: sanctions have two sides. They don't just punish their intended targets, they often trigger unintended economic collateral damage, many times backfiring on the very economies imposing them. For example, in the case of Hong Kong, any removal of its favorable customs treatment or restrictions on its financial services sector will reverberate well beyond its borders. Remember, Hong Kong is one of Asia's top financial hubs, serving as a key intermediary for global capital flows into mainland China. If sanctions disrupt those flows, European financial institutions, already battered by rising interest rates, slowing GDP growth, and domestic economic instability, will also face losses. Hong Kong's critical role in global trading systems makes sudden decoupling an expensive endeavor. With $1.2 trillion worth of investments from international firms routed through Hong Kong, efforts to punish Beijing over human rights could come with political high fives, but catastrophic economic headaches, particularly for Western investors and trade-dependent economies. This brings us to a deeper existential question: are Western economies in a financial position to sustain prolonged sanctions on China and its outposts like Hong Kong? The answer isn't as straightforward as policymakers might make it appear. Let's dig into the raw numbers to understand why. Let's take the European economy first. While lawmakers may voice strong opinions about morality and democratic values, the cold calculus of economics often tells a different story. 1. Economic slowdown across the EU. According to the International Monetary Fund, IMF, the Eurozone's GDP growth is projected to slow to 0.7% in 2024, dragged down by waning industrial output and recessionary pressures in countries like Germany. Add inflation woes into the mix, and Europe is already struggling to keep its fragile economy afloat. Imposing trade restrictions on Hong Kong or Beijing equates to shooting oneself in the foot by disrupting lucrative trade ties. In 2023 alone, EU-China trade amounted to over €700 billion, with Europe relying on China as its largest trade partner for essential sectors like consumer goods, machinery, and renewable energy equipment. Hurt China, and European businesses won't escape unscathed. 2. Dependency on Asia's financial networks. Here's a secret that lawmakers conveniently gloss over: Hong Kong isn't just a trading hub, it serves as the bridge between Western markets and the Chinese economy. Any attempt to isolate Hong Kong via sanctions will likely accelerate mainland China's plans to pivot its financial systems to Shanghai or Shenzhen, effectively decoupling from the West entirely. In other words, Western influence over Hong Kong weakens while Beijing strengthens its financial self-sufficiency. Europe risks losing not just a trade partner but access to an entire ecosystem of Asian capital markets. Now, let's turn the lens toward Beijing. Does China, with all its rhetoric of stability and national sovereignty, remain economically invincible? Hardly. China's economic slowdown is no secret. From a staggering real estate crisis that has left giants like Evergrande teetering on the edge of collapse, to plunging GDP growth, from 8.1% in 2021 to an estimated 4.5% in 2024, Beijing isn't in the invincible position it was a decade ago. However, China's ability to strategically manipulate its economy often makes sanctions less effective. 1. Export dominance. Beijing's grip on global supply chains, especially semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, and rare earth elements, gives it substantial leverage. The EU might threaten sanctions, but the question remains, can Europe afford an economic war with a country it fundamentally depends on? 2. The yuan's rise. As Western financial systems weaponize the dollar through sanctions, countries like China are accelerating attempts to internationalize the yuan. If Beijing successfully circumvents Western-dominated banking systems via partnerships with Russia, Iran, and other sanctioned regimes, it could dilute the effectiveness of European measures. Ultimately, China has resources to recalibrate in response to Western sanctions, but can Europe withstand the blowback? Let's not forget what this means for everyday consumers like you. The costs of sanctions, whether imposed directly on Hong Kong or on trade machineries involving China, typically get passed down to households. Picture this. 1. Higher prices on consumer goods, from electronics to clothing. Western reliance on Chinese manufacturing keeps costs down. Cut off that supply chain, and inflation, already at record highs, will put even more pressure on struggling middle-class families. 2. Job market woes. Export-dependent industries and multinational corporations face ripple effects from economic disruptions, with layoffs becoming inevitable as global supply chains contract. 3. Financial market volatility. Hong Kong Stock Exchange is a key conduit for global capital movement. Disruptions here could send shockwaves through global asset markets, eroding investment portfolios and pension funds. Jimmy Lai's trial and Hong Kong's political upheaval are only symptoms of a much larger economic battle between global powers. The West, intent on containing China, is weaponizing globalization, while Beijing rallies behind its state capitalist model to counter the sanctions regime. As individuals, though, we need to ask a cynical but practical question: at what cost? The erosion of Hong Kong's autonomy isn't just a moral issue, it signals the shift of a global financial bellwether toward authoritarianism. This matters because Hong Kong's significance as a global economic hub affects us all. The Western sanctions regime, designed as an economic weapon, increasingly seems like an overplayed hand. Europe and the United States risk isolating themselves from a growing bloc of economic powerhouses aligning with China. The global economy is inching closer to a tipping point. Multipolar financial systems, restructured supply chains, and decoupling aren't just headlines, they're reshaping the very architecture of international trade. In a saner timeline, policymakers would engage in dialogue to de-escalate tensions, seeking compromises that balance human rights with economic stability. But that's not our reality. What lies ahead is clear: the world's economic divide is deepening, and Hong Kong is just the latest battleground. Both the East and the West are playing a zero-sum game, and ordinary citizens like us are left footing the bill. So what can you do? Stay informed, sharpen your financial acumen, and be prepared for risks in the global economy. In this age of uncertainty, knowledge isn't just power, it's survival. That's it for today, folks. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, I'm Xiao Cui, signing off, tearing through the propaganda, and bringing you clarity in chaos.